Welcome back, Java students. In this third part of the tutorial series, I want to give you a rundown of some of the code that I provided you to kind of get you up and running on building some utility classes. A utility class is a class that is going to contain a whole bunch of functionality that supports the functionality of my main program somewhere else. And in this, I'm going to have two classes for you to use, but also to build on top of, a file read class and a file write class. Each of these classes is intended to contain the methods that do all of the reading and writing behaviors that my other parts of my program are going to need. So my runner is going to manage my main logic, and eventually, in the next section, we're going to talk about decrypting and encrypting information. But I'm going to be using this file read and file write class to provide some of the behaviors I will need for all the other stuff. And so I want to give you kind of a tour of what it is I've created and teach you a couple new things in here as well. Let's start with the file write. And in here, at the top of the class, you'll see me begin with write contents to file, a simple method that accepts a file name, some data, but also a new variable, a Boolean append data. I just want to explain this to you really quickly. Append data, if you remember in our file writer, we want to give the file name, but the second information is a Boolean, which is false if we want to override the data in a file, and true if we want to append it. So I just want to allow that to be customized when this base method is called, and I'm going to pass along the Boolean state append data and allow it to determine, are we overwriting a file or just appending to the file? And now that choice is available in the base method. Otherwise, all this does is really print out the data on a single line inside that file. Now, as we look down at the second method here, I want to teach you something new. This kind of blue text at the top here that looks a bit like a comment, except that it's something a little more special. This is called a Java doc. And if I go into my writer class and press dot right now and look at the write contents to file method that I just showed you, there's no Java doc made for it because I haven't made one yet. But you'll see some of the other files actually have Java doc information. These methods, I've created content to be viewed when I'm calling the method elsewhere in my program. So that if I forget, oh, what does write contents to file mean? Well, it reminds me, write a string in list to file, each token on a new line. And then it requires three parameters, a file name, an array list of contents, and information for appending the data. So I can create this little pop-up that we're getting used to seeing in the method selection screen. I can create my own version of it by creating a Java doc. How do I do so? It looks a little bit like a multi-line comment at the start, except I put two asterisks and hit enter, and it will auto-populate this list of information. It will assign a parameter for each parameter in my method, and it will leave me a slot to write a description. So this here, write contents to file, it's a pretty simple method. It will basically print or write data to file name file, either overriding or appending. Maybe I can make a better description. That's what came to my head right now. And I can also, if I want to, give a description for each of these parameters here. So file name, this is the name of the file to write to. Data, the data to be written. And append data, I'm going to say true equals append, false equals overwrite. And now, if I head back into my runner and I go writer dot this write contents to file method, I see this information appearing right here in the Java doc. This is a nice little addition of things that we can add, especially useful when we're making some kind of a utility type class where we can remember what it is that this particular version of a solution is applied. Because what you'll see here is I've created different versions of reading and writing methods that are meant for different scenarios that I might have to bounce around between. So this one here, I want to be in the right one here. I'm going to just compress this first method down that we've already talked about. This next one here also writes contents to file, except for this one writes a string array, an array list of strings of content. The first one was just a string. This one is a bunch of strings all together. So its algorithm is slightly different. It really does kind of the same basic idea. It just prints out all the data into a file on different lines. The first one's a bit simpler for a single string. This one's a bit more complicated for an array list of strings with a Java doc ahead of it here. So a couple options for you to write information. And now here's another one that we're going to test out. I just wanted to include it as an example of showing you some different ways that we can output data, and that maybe you want to create some kind of utility for printing out certain types of data in a program of your own. This one here is just meant to print out the numbers from 1 to 100 in the specified file, either appending it or overriding the file with it. And I'll let you take a look over most of the algorithm, but it uses two loops, a outer loop for the row, and inside of it, an inner loop for the contents inside of a row. So there's 10 rows, each with 10 items that it prints out with a tab in between. Okay, this is the kind of the delimiter, although I don't allow for a custom delimiter in here. So what happens if we run this? Let's go and write numbers with our writer. And we're going to write numbers, the basic one here. I'm going to call this count to 100.txt, and let's just make sure it overrides any file just in case there's one there already. Run this file. Let's count to 100 and see what it looks like. So I'll go into here, I count to 100 file, and there we go. Prints 1 to 100 in this kind of organized way. Just a quick recap. What if I made this true? Well, now if I run this again, it's going to add another count to 100 in the same file, but it's going to append it. So I should see, oops, a bit of a difference here. I'm now counting to 100 a second time. So this particular functionality I've now built is very specific, but you might need to build specific solutions that you need to access multiple times for your work to come. Let's pin this one up here. And next, I'm going to allow the same type of thing, print 1 to 100, except that this time I'm going to allow for a custom delimiter, write numbers custom. Now I have a custom delimiter. So what if, when I run here, instead I go, oops, custom, that's awesome. Write numbers custom, and here I think I want a custom delimiter at the end. Do I want to append data? False, I want to override it. And this time I'm going to make my delimiter slash. Let's run this and see what this looks like for the actual printout of my values. Reload this, and there we go. 1 to 100. Instead, it's all separated by these slashes. So I've built that functionality in this writing tool. Maybe that's something I want to use. Just an example for you. And I also wanted to include a bit more of an advanced one for those who want to kind of see some other things in action, where I have it doing some automatic calculating. I have it allow the user to determine the number, the highest number to count to starting from 1, but also determine how many numbers are shown per row. And then I have some calculations being done that you can study over that actually places these things in the right position automatically. It's a very generalized solution. Let's take a look at what this looks like. Write numbers advanced. And this one here, if I go for what the parameters, and so actually let's go count to, let's make a new file for count custom.txt. And what else do I need in here? Let me double check so that I can see what I need in here. A max, a num per row, and append data stay. So I'm going to count to 1,000 up by, let's go with 15 entries per row. And let's just overwrite each time here so we can see clear new data each time. So the custom counter, if I go into my file here, over here, count custom, you'll see that I count with 15 numbers per row, all the way down to 1,000, with the last row kind of being a little bit different in terms of how it's organized. You could maybe play around with this method and fix it up. Because the numbers become quadruple digits, it kind of messes up with the organization in some ways down here. Although I think there's an easy fix we could make to that method to fix it up a little bit. But something cool that we could be able to see here is, what if I count to 100,000 and I allow this to be, I don't know, let's go 22 per row. What I want you to kind of see from this is that we actually have the ability to work with lots of information in really quick ways with this data management stuff. And this one kind of customized, I'm allowing 22 per row, so I see at the top here that I have the 22 numbers in my first row all separated out to the side. But if I scroll down, I see that I've counted pretty heftily to all the way to this ugly 100,000 kind of crammed in at the bottom there with that last kind of overflow section needing some editing. But look how much information that I've exported. It only took me a fraction of a second for this file to all be produced. So I'm actually able to work with lots of information in these types of files and really combine lots of things in and out as I kind of want to. And I could think about, how do I read in all this information and organize it back in to kind of see what all the information is? Well, we'll deal with that in that next section about reading file information. So in this file writer section here, let's see, did I make anything else that I want to show you here? I think I did down below here. Yeah, I also, for the file write, I made a little method that you could take a look at for merging files that accepts a first and a second file and then creates a new file that merges them. And we'll see from our read file, our file reader in a sec utility, that I'm actually able to pull array list information from a file and store it here. And then what I do is I merge them together. And side note, please do spend some more time pausing the videos and studying these to make sense of them. But I then write out a brand new file that has that merged data, and it allows me to combine multiple different files together into one. So we could give that a try. I think I've already kind of, if I take my writer here and let's see, writer, and I want to merge files, file 1 name, file 2 name into a new merged file. I've already made a couple separate files here. Oh, I closed my notepad. Here we go. File 1 just says hello world. File 2 says welcome to file 2, enjoy your stay. So file 1 and file 2, I use numbers, but yeah. And file 2, and the merged file, I'm going to call this merged file.txt. Let's run this and produce a merged file. I think I might have already had one here. And so there we go. I've overwritten the information and hello world, welcome to file 2, enjoy your stay. Those two individual files are now combined into one, which is beautiful and exactly what we want to see here. So what can you do to practice your file writing in particular? Well, I'm going to give you a few examples of some things that you might be able to solve yourself to see how well you're doing with these things. The first one being, create a method that can join 3 different files together instead of just 2. 2 ways you could solve this. 1, you can create something totally custom, or 2, you could borrow from this merge file method, and when you create a new one, use this to help you get to your solution. So that could be the first thing that you create. Okay. A second thing for writing a file out is you could have, well, we're going to deal more with this in the next section here, but you could write the contents of a file out in a changed format. So you take the information that you've already been able to read somewhere, and then you change it up in some way. Maybe you add a custom delimiter. Maybe you insert certain phrases in between in the middle. Maybe you change some of the data inside of it. But practicing actually manipulating the contents of something and then writing it to a file could be a useful thing for you as well. And a third challenge for you to be able to write information to a file, if we kind of look at some of our functionality up here, printing out the numbers from 1 to 100 to a file, think about some of the kind of the customization of how you make things look nicely. Maybe you have a method that take in file information, or like text information, and print and output it to a file in a custom format so that it spaces in the way that you want, it's lined up all nicely in a way that you might like to see. See if you can't get it, whatever phrase it takes in, however long the string is, that it always kind of pops it out in a way that looks nice. Maybe, for example, it's something like, if I had a lot of this content side by side, it always limits it to only being allowed to be this wide, and it cuts it off to the next line. So it minimizes how far the file can be stretched sideways to fit onto the screen or something like that. Maybe you want to figure something out like that. Let's dive in for a little bit into our reader. Got some Java docs up and running, and I got a simple file here that really just prints out to the console the lines in the file one at a time. Nice simple one. The next one here, and down here, read from file custom delimiter is going to allow me to read from a file in a similar way, except that this time it takes into account the delimiter that I've sent it, just in case I know there's a custom delimiter that's not just a regular space for that file. This one here retrieves data in string form. So what this does is it holds an empty string, and as I'm reading the file, each line that it takes in, it concatenates into my data. So it's taking my data and it's adding more and more content. It's going to build this one really massive string that includes all of the information from that file. And then I return it to be used and worked with later. I also have one that retrieves all the data in array list form with array list of data type string. So I create an array list, and then each line that's in the file, I save as an entry in this array list. And so we'll get a file data array list returned that includes every single line of information in that file as a separate entry that I could iterate over and pull out and access and work with in some way that I like. This is the one that we worked with in our merge write file, just so you know. And I also have the ability to do the same thing as above. Remember, I'm providing options and different pathways in these utility files, except that I'm allowed to provide a specific delimiter, where this one up here just had a file basically. This one manages it with a delimiter attached to it as well. So just another option to work with. Now, I'd like you to consider practicing your work and solving some of these problems. Can you make a method that returns the total number of lines in a file? How about one that returns the total number of words in a file? And maybe you have to do a bit of research for this one, the total number of characters in a file. This does include spaces, the total number of characters. Could you figure out how to read a file and just figure out the number of contents inside of it? That could be extremely useful and be able to help report some things. And a couple other ones that you might want to work with, and I'll show you a couple tips for how to solve these to come as well, are first, return if a file contains a certain word or phrase. So you're able to send some text to it and then have it return if it contains it or not. And I just want to show you something. I'm going to build this here. Public Boolean file contains word or phrase. Maybe I'll call it this long. And in it, I'm going to look for the, well, let's give this a better name. Let's just say phrase, because I can just send a word for this. So this is the phrase that I'm looking for in the parameters that I'm sending it. So I'm helping you out a little bit here. But how do we actually check if one string contains another? Well, let me just type a couple things up for you here. Oops, string word or phrase one equals this is a phrase. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change my mind on something. And one sec, forgive me. I want to do that in here, so we can just run this right away. I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to create a string phrase 1 over here in my runner just to run this directly. And a string phrase 2 equals phrase. What I want to do is print out the result of, does phrase 1 contain phrase 2? Is this phrase contained in this phrase? And if I run this here, we should see a result that should be predictable, which is true. It does. But what if I just said, what if I spelt this wrong, like double H for phrase? So the spelling is a little bit off and incorrect. In this case, it's false. It hasn't actually found that containing the other one. So it's pretty easy to actually check if a string contains another string just using this .contains method. The other thing we have to use for strings sometimes is this check right here, just to remind you, equals. Anytime we want to see if strings are equivalent, we have to use this .equals comparator. So of course this will be false here, but sometimes you want to check if one word is equal to another. So this phrase.contains, string.contains method will be needed to solve the problem in determining if, oops, let's get rid of this here, if a file contains a certain word or phrase, so that you can kind of just know, is this inside of this file here? And this will be something that also might be useful in our next section to have access to be able to do some kind of digging overall. So what I'd like you to do after watching this video is read over my custom utility methods that I built to start having some functionality enabled for accessing and changing file information, and then see if you can't solve some of these challenges to practice your skills and to really get comfortable and confident in these skill sets before our challenge, which I'm going to start to overview in the next video.